The Natchez Trace always felt different from everywhere else. Even during the day, it felt like you weren't supposed to be there. There were no streetlights, no houses, no stores, just a 2-lane road cutting through miles of protected land and woods that seemed to swallow sound. People in my town grew up hearing stories about it. Old burial mounds hidden in the trees, unmarked Civil War graves, trails that went farther than anyone realized, and the one story everyone knew about the girl who was killed out there in the 90s. So the rule was simple. Don't be on the trace after dark. I was 15 when this happened, and like most 15-year-olds, I didn't think those stories had anything to do with me. My friends and I hiked out there all the time. We went off trail constantly because that's where the interesting stuff was. Broken foundations, rusty farm equipment, random clearings that didn't show up on any map. It was the early spring that day. Not quite summer, but the sun was staying out longer and the air had that warm, damp feeling that made the woods smell alive. We had been hiking for about an hour when we went off trail like we always did. That's when we came out of the trees and saw the field and the truck. That was the first thing that felt wrong. No vehicles were allowed off-road anywhere along the trace. It wasn't just frowned upon, it was a federal crime. But there it was. An old truck sitting in the middle of an open clearing. 2 men stood next to it. They both had shovels in their hands. And there was a pile of fresh dirt next to a hole that was already deep enough that you couldn't see the bottom from where we were standing. For a few seconds, nobody moved. They just stared at us, and we stared at them. It felt like we had walked into something we weren't supposed to see. I don't know who moved first. I just remember both of them jumping into the truck at the same time. The engine roared. And then they drove straight at us, full speed. We ran back into the trees without even thinking. Branches hit my face and arms as we pushed through the woods. I could hear the truck behind us until it suddenly stopped at the edge of the tree line. Doors slammed. Then shouting, real shouting, angry, close. We ran harder. I remember my lungs burning and my legs feeling like they were about to give out, but I didn't dare slow down. After what felt like forever, we dove into a deadfall where a bunch of trees had collapsed over each other. It created this hollow space underneath, just big enough for us to crawl into. We didn't say a word. We didn't even look at each other. We just lay there trying not to breathe too loud. That's when we heard the dogs. At first it was faint, then closer, barking, deep. The kind of bark that carries through the woods. One of the men yelled, "I can't see you, but I can hear you." Then he said something I will never forget. "My dog's gonna get you." I felt every part of my body go completely still. I was convinced they were going to drag us out of there. Time stopped making sense. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been an hour. All I remember is the sound of the woods, the barking getting closer and then farther away, boots moving through leaves, branches snapping somewhere in the distance. At one point, I was sure they were right on top of us, but they never found us. Eventually, we heard the truck start again. The sound faded. We still didn't move. Not until everything was completely silent. Even then, we waited longer. When we finally crawled out, it was almost dark. We walked back toward the car without speaking. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow looked like someone standing there. The entire drive home, I kept watching the headlights behind us. Every time a car turned onto the same road, my heart started pounding. I was sure it was them, that they had found our car, that they were following us. We'd never told anyone what happened. Not our parents, not the police. We just stopped hiking out there. As I got older, I kept thinking about what we saw. The hole. The truck bed we couldn't see into. The fact that they chased us instead of telling us to leave. When I was younger, I assumed the worst. That we had stumbled onto a body. Now I'm not sure. It could have been drugs, money, something stolen. But whatever it was, they were willing to hunt 2 kids through the woods to protect it. And the part that still bothers me the most is this. I still live in the same town. It's small enough that you see the same people everywhere, at the grocery store, at gas stations, at red lights, and sometimes I'll be standing in line somewhere, and I'll catch myself looking at the faces around me, wondering if one of them is older now, gray hair, different clothes, living a completely normal life. And I'll think about that field, that hole in the ground, and the voice in the woods saying, "I can hear you," for a long time after that. I couldn't hear dogs barking without thinking about that day. Not normal neighborhood dogs, not the small yappy ones behind fences. I'm talking about the deep, echoing kind that carry through the trees. The kind that sound like they're getting closer even when they're not. Because in those woods, sound didn't move the way you expected it to. It bounced, it stretched. It made it impossible to tell how far away anything actually was. And lying under that pile of fallen trees, every bark felt like it was right behind us. I remember trying to slow my breathing so they wouldn't hear it. I remember pressing my face into the dirt because I was scared the white of my skin would somehow stand out in the dark. I remember thinking about my parents, about how they had no idea where I was, about how stupid it would be if that was the last decision I ever made. To go off trail like we always did. After we got back to the car, neither of us said anything for a long time. Not because we didn't want to, but because saying it out loud would make it real. And there was something about the normal world that felt wrong after that. The paved road, the radio, the familiar turns back into town. It all felt fake, like we had stepped out of something we weren't supposed to survive. For weeks after, I had this constant feeling that I was being watched. Not in a dramatic way, just little things. Driving home at night and seeing the same pair of headlights for too long. A truck parked on the side of the road with someone sitting inside it. A man standing in an aisle at the grocery store who looked up a second too late. I started wondering if they had seen our faces clearly, if they had watched us get into our car, if they had found the trail we used to get back, because if they did, they would know exactly where to look for us. That was the part that kept me up at night. Not what they were doing in that field, but the possibility that they knew who we were. In a town that small, you don't stay anonymous. Everybody goes to the same stores, the same gas stations, the same stoplights. And sometimes I'll be sitting at an intersection and there'll be an old truck a few cars ahead of me. Nothing special about it, just an old truck. But my brain goes right back to that clearing, to the way it looked sitting there in the middle of nowhere, like it didn't belong. And I'll find myself trying to see the driver's face in the mirror, trying to decide if it's someone I should recognize, or someone who already recognizes me. I've never gone back to that part of the trace, not even during the day, not even with a group. because there's a difference between knowing a place is dangerous and feeling like it remembers you. And every time I drive past one of the trail entrances, I think about that hole in the ground, about how deep it already was, about what would have happened if we had walked into that clearing 5 minutes later, when they were finished digging. A few months after it happened, my friend and I finally talked about it. Not in detail, just enough to confirm that neither of us had imagined it. He told me he still had nightmares about the barking, not seeing the dogs, just hearing them coming from somewhere behind him in the dark. I admitted that I still checked my rear view mirror every time I drove home at night, even when I knew no one was there. We both laughed it off like it was just something that had scared us when we were kids, but neither of us ever went hiking out there again. Not even with other people, not even during the middle of the day. Years later, I was driving the Natchez Trace with someone who had never been there before. They kept talking about how peaceful it looked, how quiet it was, how it felt like you were completely alone in the world. And I remember gripping the steering wheel a little tighter as we passed one of the trail entrances, because I knew how far back those woods actually went. I knew how easy it was to disappear just a few steps off the path, and how no one on the road would ever see you. Every clearing we passed made my chest tighten. Every break in the tree line made me think about that truck, about how out of place it looked, about how fast it started moving toward us. At one point, we drove past a section where the trees opened up and I caught myself looking for fresh dirt, like I expected to see another hole, like part of me still thought I would. The strangest thing is that I don't even remember what my friend and I were talking about that day before it happened. I don't remember what we were looking for. I don't remember what trail we started on. But I remember every sound from the moment those men saw us, the engine, the doors slamming, the way their voices carried through the trees, and that sentence, "I can hear you." Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had frozen in that clearing instead of running. If we had tried to explain why we were there. If we had assumed they were just angry we were trespassing, because at 15, you still believe adults are supposed to be safer than you. You still think there's a version of the situation where you talk your way out of it. But the way they drove at us, there was no talking. And that's the part that makes me certain we weren't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. We interrupted something they were willing to chase us through the woods to protect. And even now, all these years later, when I hear someone say they're going hiking on the trace, I don't tell them this story. I just tell them to stay on the trail and to leave before dark.